Hi, Dunk. It's great to see you. Thanks so much for coming on the show. How are you doing?
I'm good, Pete. Yeah, really, really excited to chat. And you're all grown up. You've got your own podcast now. Look at you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny how it came about, but yeah, I feel really privileged to have this, and it's been brilliant to be able to interview some people with great experience, and really appreciate you coming on because I know you've got a depth of experience and a broad background, and just really looking forward to pressing into that and hearing more about it. So
Yeah,
why
no,
don't we
it's good.
jump straight in and yeah, just tell me about how you've got to where you are, a bit of the journey where you came from, and what you're doing now.
Yeah, I mean the Cliff Notes kind of the expedited version is I was always just a sports scientist by trade. I did my PhD over here in the US, the University of Connecticut with Bill Kramer back in the day. That really stoked my interest in kind of resistance training and muscle physiology. So I then orientated very much to looking at muscle physiology and strength training, resistance training. And at that point in my academic journey, I started to volunteer at the University of Connecticut, big kind of successful American collegiate program in the weight room, and then that stoked my interest in strength and conditioning for as a career. So after I graduated, I went back to the UK and dropped into the British Olympic system with the English Institute of Sport as it was back in the day. And I was a strength and conditioning coach, but had a background in kind of sports science. That was my PhD. And I worked 3 Olympic cycles, in the same organisation that you did. So I was through Beijing, London, and Rio. I had the opportunity to work, with lots of different sports teams. In particular, for Beijing, a lot of boxing in the northeast of England. London, I was the lead strength and conditioning coach for Great Britain basketball, and then Rio, I was the lead for Great Britain taekwondo and also Great Britain para swimming through the games. Then I came back to I had a couple of years in the English Premier League with Newcastle United, and I came back to the United States where I got an inaugural position as the Director of Performance Sciences at the University of Notre Dame. Again, another big NCAA collegiate program. I was there for about 15 months, and after that, the UFC kind of recruited me for a new position that they were creating, and also a new entity as the UFC Performance Institute. And I was the first vice president as I was hired. I'm now senior vice president of the UFC Performance Institute, and I manage and direct all the auxiliary performance services for a global roster of about 720 fighters around the world. We've got our headquarters here in Las Vegas, and then sister facilities in Shanghai and Mexico City, where we've got talent development academies as well. So, I started on my journey with the UFC with 6 staff members and 1 intern, so there were 7 of us on day one, and now I've got 76 staff members around the world in
Wow.
different facilities, and it's grown exponentially in the last 8 years. So yeah, it's been a ride for sure.
Wow, I mean, what an incredible journey. I mean, you've clearly done some really important roles within sports and some heads of departments and some lead roles. How have you got to those positions as a leader? Were you always interested in leadership, or was this just something that you naturally walked into, or what did that journey look like from actual sort of leadership perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously yours coming on, and you start to reflect on, geez, what we're going to talk about and how I'm going to prepare myself and where have I come from. And you're like, geez, was leadership something that I chose, or was it something that you fall into? And I think it's a little bit of everything. I mean, listen, I think I was a very good communicator. I think I'm a good communicator, and certainly as a coach. When I was on the floor coaching, you've got to be able to influence different athletes and different personalities in different ways. So you kind of then begin to, explore how you communicate and influence others. That's pollinated kind of an idea and an opportunity. And then I layer on my background as a sports scientist, and you start to then attach kind of different disciplines together and say, okay, well, I can be a multifaceted professional with different outputs. And you see that more and more in this day and age, as people are either, you know, physiotherapists and strength and conditioning coach with dual certifications, or you see someone that's a dietitian with, you know, different massage capabilities, or whatever it may be. You know, you see these people putting their respective credentials together. And that was kind of how I went down this pathway. But certainly, you know, I was elevating within the ranks of strength and conditioning, and, you know, anyone in leadership will tell you that the irony of leadership is that you actually get further and further away from your core competence, usually. Because, you know, you are in a position where you're successful, then the organization that you're working for, they want you to manage that domain or lead others in that domain because your skills are good. And suddenly you start to find yourself, you know, leading small groups, small teams as a strength and conditioning department or whatever it may be. And then suddenly I grew into positions where I'm leading multi-interdisciplinary professional domains. And you think, geez, how did I end up here? So, you know, I've certainly fallen into it a little bit, rather than actually, okay, I've always wanted to progress. I've always wanted to be at the forefront of, you know, leading high performance initiatives and being at the, you know, the sharp end of the spear in terms of, okay, I want to be influential. I'm not really sure, you know, that I've ever said, you know, I need to be a performance director, or that is my next goal, my next ambition. I think as the industry, when I was coming through it, was at the time, it was just something that I maybe fell into. But, you know, I'm blessed and I'm lucky, and I appreciate it. And looking back, I think it's still the pathway that I would have cognitively chosen, consciously chosen, rather than not. So, you know, I'm pleased that I'm here.
No, I mean, that's really good. And you said some really interesting things there around, you know, a few things that you're good at. One, communicating, and I can obviously attest to that. I've listened to you do, you know, lots of keynote talks at conferences. I've seen you coach on the floor up in the northeast of England back in EIS days. I've seen you in your board role as chairman of the UKSCA when I was on your board, and then succeeded you as the chairman. So I've seen you in lots of different roles and seen your ability to communicate, and clearly that is one of your skills. But interestingly, you know, you've said you were, or you were very established in your discipline as well, as a strength and conditioning coach, sports scientist, and, you know, multiple publications, and very influential, and you use that word influence. So just really interested to see how you've pulled a couple of those key values of leaders, the communication side and the influence side. And I wonder if along that journey, are there any key moments that have really kind of shaped those areas, or shaped you as a leader?
I mean, yes. There's definitely been multiple scenarios along the way. Listen, I think, you know, for me, experientially understanding communication pathways, or at least understanding situational communication. I recall very vividly a time when I was at the English Institute, working with the Great Britain basketball team as the head of physical performance, head strength and conditioning coach. It was a new entity when the games had been announced as a home nation. We created the entity of Great Britain basketball. So at that point in time, you know, funding was challenging, and the resources across our interdisciplinary performance team was limited. So, you know, you kind of say, all right, I'm going to pull my sleeves up, I'm going to get after it, I'll be creative. And part of that was looking at nutrition and how we can introduce nutrition supplementation to our programming. And I cold called kind of the head of nutrition of the English Institute of Sport at that moment in time, to ask about how I'm going to be able to bring online, you know, protein or creatine supplementation, how I'm going to source that, etc., etc. You know, this individual clearly was, you know, driving a car, you know, so maybe at the wrong situation. I caught them at the wrong time. I don't know if they've had a bad day or a good day, but clearly that was interpreted as a strength and conditioning coach stepping outside their defined role, and moving into a different role. At which point I I got pretty lit up from an aggressive retort, and coming back to say, why am I trying to do someone else's job that is not my remit, etc., etc. So that was something that then escalated up to senior management, the whole organisation. And here I was just trying to be creative, thinking I was being proactive, trying to do the right thing, trying to make positive movement. But again, what I take from that is, that there are hierarchical lines of messaging and communication. There is very much an understanding about situational timing of messaging and communication, and making sure that the messages are delivered in a correct fashion rather than cold calling someone up, dropping a new idea on them, and them not necessarily being prepared with the backstory. So, that was certainly something as a younger professional. I was like, okay, well, I don't want that to happen to me again, because that was pretty serious at the time. It really highlighted the importance of communication, the timing of communication, and these types of things. And then, the stresses of leadership, because I've gone to someone who was the head of nutrition, and that clearly their mind is elsewhere. So, that was something that was very, very influential in how I try to look at managing interactions with others at this moment in time.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, of all the podcasts I've done on this show, nobody's really mentioned that side of kind of the timing of communication, understanding hierarchy, and how to operate within certain contexts and situations. So really good learning there. So appreciate you sharing that. But it takes a lot of humility as well to learn from that, because some people would just go, oh, that's their issue. They don't want to listen to me. I've got a good idea and whatever. So, I mean, you obviously got the emotional intelligence to realize, to understand the situation. And is that kind of something that comes naturally? Are you quite aware of people and situations, or have you had to work on that?
Yeah, I mean, couple of things, and this sounds strange, but I used to be a child actor before I got into sport, and I think I'm
I
very
never knew
good.
that.
Yeah, so that was my career path. I was going to be like a Macaulay Culkin of this world type thing, So I was TV and radio and stage actor
Wow.
as a
So are
child.
you acting now, or is this the real Duncan
Well,
French?
there you go. All right, smoke and mirrors with Duncan French. But I think what I was good at was being a character actor. All right, and I always put down being a good coach to my acting. Not that I used to go to a Saturday morning drama school. Do you know what I mean? I wasn't like a trained thespian or anything, but I was a good character actor. And I think I always look at my ability to change hats and change behaviors. That's been supportive in talking up to the boardroom, talking to media, connecting with athletes, connecting with coaches, speaking to my peers. We have to wear different hats, and one size does not always fit all for a communication strategy. And I think, when I look back at that, I've always felt that, that's something which has allowed me to communicate well. But I'm very empathetic, and certainly as I've grown in my leadership roles, and now understanding the challenges that my team of 76 individuals, they've all got their own stresses at home, at the workplace, outside socially, emotionally, whatever it may be. And I think I'm very empathetic to understand that you never know the backstory to someone, right? You never understand kind of situationally where they're at entirely, from, if is their home life disruptive, if they had a bad night's sleep, it's human nature. And, being empathetic, or at least somewhat accommodating, that we're not robots, right? I always say, I don't work in a sports industry, I work in a people industry, all right? And the ability to influence and support and affect people is my job now as a leader. So that's been something which I think I've tried to develop as I've gone through my career, and certainly as I've fallen into different leadership roles and team leadership. I've tried to be much more cognizant of how I address others, whether that's managing up horizontally or managing downwards. That I've got to still be, humanistic and empathetic in my messaging, and some of the probing questions that I might be asking.
Yeah, no, that's interesting and fascinating, and good to hear that you kind of, got that awareness to be empathetic and accommodating and understand people and their situations. I want to jump back to some of the things that you've mentioned. So you've mentioned impact quite a bit, and you've mentioned influence quite a bit. And one of the things that I've observed in your career is that you have had a real influence and impact in the specific sports that you've worked in that you've set up new systems and processes or created protocols, or you've quantified training, or you've done something to really make a mark and bring a level of thought leadership. And so in Taekwondo, and in a number of the sports that you've worked in, and now on a real big scale within mixed martial arts within the UFC. There was very little known about that sport, and you and your team have kind of measured and quantified and been able to really bring a level of thought leadership. How did that come about, and what was the drive there?
Yeah, and this is come back to your earlier question probably. Sometimes you just fall into the situation and it's sink or swim. And I think, the very first example of this was with the Great Britain basketball team for the London cycle. And again, basketball was not something that we naturally qualified for to the games. We just weren't good enough. But as a host nation, we created a GB basketball entity, and I was the men's and women's, head of performance. So that was probably the first time I recall where it's like, okay, I've got to build something. I've got to create. I've got to build. The next real time, GB Taekwondo. They had some facility developments, things like that, and then it was into the University of Notre Dame, where again I was going into a new entity, a new position that had been formulated, and I had to create what that was, how that was defined. And then clearly here at the UFC, that was a blank page that was handed to me. They never had any type of infrastructure like we've created with the Performance Institute. And it was like, okay, I'm the man that's tasked with figuring this out, creating the structure, the organizational processes, and how we're going to go about solving the problems that we're faced with. So I've become really interested in building. I think I'm a builder, and I enjoy it, and I think I like formulating and creating new structure and building new systems and processes, and that's something which I resonate to. And the other side of that is, now we've been going 8.5 years here at the UFC. So whilst we're still green, we're actually pretty incumbent now. And you start to go, okay, well, how do we freshen it up? How do we keep it fresh? How do we stop it from becoming very dogmatic to staff and, okay, this is what it is, and what's the next point of building and creating and making it fresh again? So it's just something which I definitely fell into. I don't know that it was something that I was targeting or strategically looking to do, and it was certainly learning on the job. And I think that takes me back to one of my earlier comments is, yes, as a strength and conditioning coach, I had to create programs, had to, expose athletes to training strategies, but it was a very different type of workflow. And then when you drop into leadership roles, managing others, you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to learn on the fly here. I've got to actually upskill very quickly because I'm not coming with that, that embedded skill from my previous experiences. So, building new systems and new infrastructure was something which I kind of fell into, and I really want to, and I enjoy. And as challenging as it is, it's something which I've done multiple times now throughout my career, as you point out.
Yeah, no, and the thing about building something is that you're actually leaving a legacy, and there's evidence of your work. There's something that you've set up and you're leaving and you're passing on.
I hope so.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and I think that as a leader, when you're given an opportunity, or as a person, when you're given an opportunity, you either step up to it or you don't. And clearly, you've had opportunities and you've taken them. And you've made that mark and been influential, and I think that the work you've done is testament to that. I kind of want to switch tracks a bit now and just look at some of the things that maybe some of the tools that you use as a leader, or maybe some of the models or frameworks that you have, or maybe a few rules of thumb that you might use. Like, is there anything that you turn to in terms of leadership models, or I always use this rule of thumb when I'm in this situation, or I like to use this framework? Can you speak into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'll say is that you probably should ask my staff if I'm a good leader. I always feel a little bit of a fraud sitting here saying, oh, well, I'm good at leadership, etc., because those people that I've led, my teams in different organizations, are going to be the ones that confer that or not. I think what I will say is that good leadership requires good fellowship. And I think I've created environments where people do want to follow, and people do want to jump on the bandwagon that I'm creating or that I've had the opportunity to build. And I think, I don't have high staff turnover. Something that I'm very proud of is that, people want to work in our organizations. Clearly I've, staff move on and do different things and they want to grow in their careers, and that, that's natural. There's some churn, but I think as a large scale messaging, I don't see a lot of people moving on from a Duncan French team or organization, and that's something which I'm very cognizant of and very proud of. I philosophically, yes, we have organizational hierarchy. So I obviously sit at the top of an organization, but I'm a huge believer in daily holacracy. So a holacratic system which flattens out the management structure on a day-to-day basis. So whilst we have reporting lines and hierarchy, because I tend to work in interdisciplinary teams, I really want to flatten out our management system. It's a very flat day-to-day experience. I'm no more important than the next person on a day-to-day basis, and that breeds the democratization of leadership, so that we can promote smaller leadership identities within our teams. That then moves into another terminology. I use the term situational leadership. So I think when we're working with athletes and in professional sport and all the different scenarios that are thrown at us, if we only ever work to a rigid model that is a hierarchical model, we're going to miss the needs, outcomes, and the goals and the objectives that athlete X might need versus athlete Y. So our system needs to be able to pivot and move and flex in order to meet the needs of every specific athlete, or within a particular team, or a group of positional players within a team, whatever sport you may work with. So for me, holacracy and the flattening out of our management system on a day-to-day basis leads to this situational leadership, which gives my staff extreme ownership. And again, when you look at Jocko Willink's book, Extreme Ownership, there's a lot of really powerful messaging in there, that whether you are at the top of an organization or whether you're a team leader, a smaller group leader, a discipline lead, or whatever it may be, leadership has to sit throughout your whole organization. And that's something which I certainly try to do, is provide opportunities for my staff to build leadership qualities. I know that I'm not the brightest guy in the room. I know that I am also tasked with leading the whole team. So I'm going to leverage and lean on my staff. I don't micromanage. I hire good people and get out of the way and let them do what they need to do. And then I bookend it with management direction and management audit and evaluation. So there's certainly things that I lean on and I look towards in terms of methods and systems and processes. And I'll finish by saying, even high performers, the highest high performers, still need guardrails to operate within. So we always, in leadership, you always start to think about people that are underperforming or not getting the job done. And clearly there's a role in leadership where you have to address that. But the other side of that narrative is also, elite performers, your elite team members. They still need very clear parameters to function and operate in, and often that's something which people neglect to think about as well.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting point, because I think sometimes there's the danger that people think if you either micromanage and control people, or you just leave them and it's a free-for-all. But it's not. There's a different way of dealing with people where you give them autonomy, you empower them, but they still work within boundaries. Everybody needs boundaries. There's no freedom unless there's boundaries. And so I loved what you said there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And listen, and for total transparency, I know recently, and since Christmas, I've been bogged down by a heavy workload, And I've been pulled a little bit further from kind of day-to-day management and being around my team and being closely connected to the team. And yeah, consequently, there's been some disruptions that have, moved us from our high-functioning system. And it was very apparent upon reflection that that was my problem. I was pulled away trying to do different project work for elsewhere in the organization, and my ability to have a real understanding on what was going on the ground day to day with challenges, and consequently we've had some kind of speed bumps in the road. But yeah, I now recognize that I've got to get back to being close to the operation and get these high performers really functioning well together again, and working in harmony, and giving them direction and strategic approach to how we're going to do that. So this is not, oh well, we've got this structure and we're going to implement it and it's static and it's going to work. Like every day, every week, every month is these systems, these leadership structures and organizations, they're very fragile, they're very dynamic in nature, and I think the best leaders are the ones that can understand that. Just dropping in my system and walking away and say, right guys, go do it, is not the right approach. You've got to understand that there's going to be different challenges and pressure tests that are going to come and disrupt that, and how do you then have the ability to re-establish the base system, or to pivot and flex and move to a new method of thinking based on our new awareness of how our system kind of was disrupted by an insult. So that's something which I'm very cognizant of as well, with recent experiences.
Yeah, no, it's good to hear, because it's obviously a dynamic system and it's not something that you set and forget. This is something you work on and work on regularly. I really like what you said earlier about, the kind of the hierarchy versus the flat structure and the holacracy, the fact that you've got a really nice balance there that, on a day-to-day basis, it feels pretty flat. And you're able to empower people and help them become leaders. And I think one of the things I've observed is that leaders develop leaders. If you're doing your job right and you're not micromanaging, you actually are empowering people to find their strength in leadership and allow them to grow and flourish and develop as leaders of other people and so on. And I'm sure that's why you've managed to grow from less than 10 of you to 76 people, and it's good to hear some of those structures that you're using.
Well, what I would say, and again, it's there's times when I need to be in charge and direct, and take extreme ownership across everything that happens for our organization. That's my job, right?
Yeah.
But I also mentally think, all right, I need to become the least important person in the room. All right, because if I'm the least important person in the room, it means all of these constituent parts are functioning very well, with clarity, with precision, with focus and a mission, and my requirements to be embedded and manage that is removed. So I think being the least important person in the room is also kind of another mentality.
Yeah.
And what I would say is that the human ego is one of the biggest barriers to successful organizational structures and success, because again, everyone wants an athlete to succeed as long as it's their intervention that did it. You know what I mean? And that's kind of human nature in our world. So managing egos, managing people putting their ambitions, their personal mission ahead of the organizational mission, it's going to happen. And I think I'm very cognizant of that as well. That's human nature. Some egos are very large and very disruptive. And in my position as leadership, I have to work with those staff to try and understand how we manage their ego, how we use it to support and flourish what we're trying to do, and then how they need to manage it and be more cognizant of how it influences and affects negatively our operation. So that's another part of management is dealing with people's egos.
Yeah, sounds like you're role modeling it well, though, because if you've got this attitude that you need to be the least important person in the room instead of the most important, and it's all about you, it's kind of counterintuitive, because it reflects well on you as a leader when your team is out there functioning and flourishing and bringing in the best people isn't a threat to you, because it reflects on you as a leader. And I think that's another real lesson for our listeners, is that sometimes taking that step back and being able to be secure enough in yourself and your role is an important factor of being able to kind of release people.
Absolutely, and like I say, I'm a going back to models and frameworks and inspiration. I'm a huge team player. Like I want to be part of the team. I steal this from Jeremy Shepherd, who's a good buddy of mine. But like I want to do cool shit with cool people, right? And I want our organization to be recognized for just how much it's pushing the boundaries and how effective and functional it is. And I want to do that with teammates that make me happy and I make them happy, and we're in this together and we enjoy it. But there's times in leadership where you're going to feel alone and disconnected, and that's the other side of leadership, is that you often feel on an island because you just have a different level of accountability to other people. So it's finding that balance between teamship and camaraderie, your ability to navigate through loneliness and challenging decision making, where it's all going to lie on you, and no one teaches you that bit in school. That's a bit of leadership, and I know you can probably relate in the roles that you've had. That there's a loneliness to leadership as well.
Absolutely. And in terms of inspirations, I mean, are there any others, or are there kind of books you've read or things you've heard or other people? You obviously mentioned Jeremy Shepherd. I'm sure there's others. Are there other inspirations that you've had, or that you lean on through, that you have leaned on throughout your journey?
Well, I mean, like most, I'm trying to keep it's interesting because I want to continue to be a great scientist, and I want to continue to be a great strength coach, and I have to be able to challenge my staff members across multiple different domains, whether that's sports medicine, nutrition, etc., etc. While it's not my core competency in my education and my training, which orientates towards strength and conditioning and sports science, I still need to be able to challenge my head of sports medicine. I still need to be able to challenge my head of nutrition to say, all right, why are we doing what we're doing? Is there a better way? Why did you choose to do that? So I've got to upskill in some of this generalism of technical knowledge. So certainly, part of my reading, part of my education continues to be, how can I understand more about sports medicine? How can I understand more about supplementation? How can I understand about sports psychology, so I can speak to those guys about what they're doing with our athletes, etc., etc. I read a lot of ebooks or leadership books. I think No Bullshit Leadership by Chris Hurst is an outstanding book. I love it. I've mentioned Extreme Ownership by Jacko Willink and Leif Babin. That's a really good book that just talks about leadership throughout an organization. I think James King's kind of Accelerating Excellence is got some really nice messaging in there. So there's leadership, and then you go back to How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, which I spoke at a conference the other day. I asked people to put their hands up. How many of you read NSCA, Strength Tools of Strength and Conditioning, or sports science, or exercise physiology textbooks? Everyone puts their hand up. And how many of you read How to Win Friends and Influence People? 2 people put their hands up. This has had 30 million copies sold, and it was written in 1936, and comes back to we've got to understand people and influencing the behaviors of others. That's as important as the technical skills as well. So I draw interest and I draw knowledge from talking to people like yourself as a good buddy, and comes back to kind of leadership positions. Jeremy, yourself, who can I speak to? Adam Beard I speak to a fair amount down in Australia, see what he's doing. There's a bunch of folk, because when you get into leadership positions, you don't always have the answers, and you need to draw inspiration from others, and that has to take you to communicating and collaborating with people in other sporting organizations sometimes, or people that are going to be experiencing the same challenges that you are. So to answer your question succinctly, I've tried to keep up to speed in lots of different areas, because I've got to be a great generalist as a leader. Number one, from an ability to challenge and interrogate and audit. Number two, from an ability to actually strategically lead and build direction. Number three, from a behavioral perspective, i.e. how am I conducting myself and what do I need to do, and then number 4, just making sure I'm sense checking it with others in other organisations to make sure I'm not doing anything that's harebrained and untoward.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, it sounds like an absolute impossible task, but what I like is that you've got a really good balance there, because I do speak to some sort of young leaders or people coming into new leadership roles, and they're all about reading the kind of the popular leadership books, which is brilliant, and I think they need to, and some of the big bestsellers, and like you said, How to Win Friends and Influence People, something I read years ago and go back to from time to time. But it seems that some people will just go down that route and just like, right, I'll read everything on leadership and forget the fact that they need to be a generalist in the disciplines as well, sports science and medical services and disciplines that you've talked about. And I like the way you've got that balance of, still wanting to read, still wanting to upskill, still wanting to be able to challenge your people and have enough knowledge as a generalist to be able to do that. So I think that's a great balance. And the other balance I also kind of see is that it's not just kind of reading, but it's spending time with the right people, listening to the right things. So you're kind of gleaning things from lots of different angles. And I think that's another really important message for our listeners or for those starting a leadership journey, that you need multiple inputs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've spoken about it a number of times. You ultimately move further and further and further away from your core competency. Usually that's the scenario. Until you then do an MBA or some kind of leadership training online at Stanford or Harvard or whatever it may be, right? And it's like, oh, I need to scramble to get my leadership skills up, and you forget about actually where you came from. And I think certainly in my current role, where I've got 7 different verticals within our organisation, I need to be, and 76 staff within those 7 verticals. I need to be able to interrogate and challenge and audit for myself to say, is this good? Is this best in class? Is this of a world-class standard? If I don't know that, I mean, leadership books are not going to help me do that. I still need to understand what the latest science is telling me and what the latest kind of methodology is being presented in the field and what other organizations are doing. So, yes, it's a lot to take on, but I think I owe that to my staff, that I've got to be authentic in the conversations that I'm having with them, that it's powerful conversations. Someone that's been my director of sports medicine has been to 7 or 8 different Olympic games. You know what I mean? She's superb. I need to still challenge her though. I still need to drive her and push her forwards and give her kind of questions that are going to make her a better version of herself and that department. So I've got to do a duty to all of my staff. Not just those that are new into the profession that we've hired, but also well-established professionals that still need direction and interrogation. So yeah, it's finding that balance between continuing to progress my behaviors, my skill sets in leadership, my ability to support and influence others and work within a team setting, my ability to build strategic models and what is business strategy. That's completely different to behavioral science, but like business strategy. And then, like I say, the technical side of it, and keeping at least somewhat up to speed. We've been able to have powerful conversations in the technical domains.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I love the way you talked about your behaviors, because often that goes missing in the conversation, and people talk about kind of the systems and processes they're setting up, or operational stuff, and don't really talk about being accountable for their behaviors. And that's quite a hard thing to do as well, and that means that you're allowing people to speak into your life and say, hey, have you thought about doing this, or maybe you should do this differently? And I'm sure you have close friends who are doing that. I'm sure your wife does that and says, hey, you need to start behaving less like this and more like this, or maybe your kids are keeping you accountable. Who knows where that's coming from, but it's refreshing to hear that you are talking about your personal behaviors.
Which takes me back to that very first story that I was telling you about, where I called up the head of nutrition and got berated down the phone. I was trying to do something positive, but because they were having kind of a bad day, or I caught them at the wrong time in traffic, trying to get home after the end of their working day, and they were just kind of pissed off. Like, what came back at me was certainly not what I expected. So I always kind of refer back to that. It wasn't a leadership lesson, but it was certainly an interaction and a communication and a behavior lesson that, as
Yeah.
I say, sometimes people are going to be frustrated or in a bad, in a bad mental state, and it might be nothing to do with work. It might be something from, financial at home or family or relationships or whatever, and we've got to be pragmatic, and I think my leadership positions have allowed me to be way more balanced. I'm less impulsive, less reactive, or I try to be less reactive. I try not to
Yeah.
snap back and make a judgment on a question or a process with my staff and my team, immediately. Sometimes I've got to step back and process it. If someone sent me an email and I'm like, whoa, what's this all about? Okay, maybe I just need to either sleep on it or go and have some lunch and then revisit it when I'm in a different mindset after I've had some time away from the computer. So, again, that's where I'm drawing on this historical
Mm.
experience to say, okay, in every situation, every interaction, how are you optimizing or maximizing that interaction for me as the lead to get someone to do something that they don't necessarily want to do but thinks they've achieved it once they have,
Yeah.
um, or working with people that ultimately have got no direction. So it's all about kind of creating that opportunity to get the best interaction.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a high level of understanding yourself because you talked about, not wanting to be kind of reactive and impulsive, but being able to take a step back. So that's kind of coming back to this emotional intelligence and understanding yourself and being self-aware, this high level of self-awareness, but also understanding other people. And I think that's one of the big challenges as a leader is like understanding yourself and understanding others. And some people are great at one and not the other, but you've got to be able to hold both of them in tension. Otherwise, you lose people, or you lose your way as a leader.
Yeah, and I think, again, coming back to one of your early questions, when you start to look at experientially which leaders have you been around, who's influenced you, how have they influenced you? I've had everything from, Slovakian basketball head coaches slapping me in the face in front of the team, um, you
Wow.
know, which is not my idea of great leadership, through to, people that are super interested in my family and my personal life. That might be a little bit too much. Okay, I need you to continue to be a leader. But again, I've tried to draw on people where, I look to how they manage, how they are emotive and bring energy and, a momentum and a desire to succeed to an organization. I mean, right now, Dana White's one of the best leaders I've been around, because the way he can create a movement, create an energy around a project, whether we want to do it or not. There's still a dynamic nature to what he's doing, that it's hard not to jump on board and say, yeah, let's get after it. Like let's go. And
Mm.
he's someone that really wants to support his team and is partisan and really looks after his people. So. Yeah, but there's lots of other leaders throughout my career. Whether it's been in the Olympic programs, in pro soccer, or my academic career, where I've looked to those leaders for direction.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I guess having people like Dana who bring so much inspiration and motivation is another real key element of leadership that, we hadn't touched on until you mentioned that. And I think that's, important to, go. It's not just important to have good people and good systems and good processes, but being able to then motivate and bring people on a journey with you and so on is also a super important element. I mean, I want to. You've talked a lot about kind of areas of leadership that you are good at, or the areas that you have worked at operating in and improving in. Is there anything else that you think's kind of unique to your style that you haven't mentioned, or something that, yeah, some sort of different quality or characteristic that you think is a real strength for you or really helps you to stand out?
Man, that's a really good question. I mean, listen, I try, I try to put humor into a lot of what I do. I like to have fun. We should all be enjoying ourselves. It's high pressure. Certainly there's high revenue margins are involved in some of these sports, and financial play a role, and success is critical to many different team sports and professional sports and things like that. But I think humour is something which I always try to use as a mechanism to dilute stress and tension. I think that's really important, and that's just my mechanism and who I am. Outside of that, like I said, I just try to be authentic. I try to, be one of the team. I always want to be seen as someone that people can come and speak to, regardless of whether that's challenging, whether it's me you're calling out, whether it's someone else you're calling out, whether there's an issue, whatever. I've got to put my big boy pants on and take it on the chin. Yeah, at the end of the day, I'm the organisational lead. Extreme ownership. It's my responsibility to make this thing ultimately function as a whole. But I try to be very accessible. I try to be very open. I know that, like I say, I don't always have the answer immediately, but I'll try and work towards something that is going to be effective for everybody, or for the greater group. And I want to bring together, the collective expertise. It's, Stephen Miller put something on Instagram the other day, which was like, great, that's exactly what, the cleverest person in the room is the group. And I want to leverage and harness that. And, that's when you start to do real cool entrepreneurial enterprise type activities where everyone's aligned to the same mission. And again, I come back to Dana. Listen, you could ask any of my staff if they're overworked, and when Dana comes up with a new idea and tells the organization to do it, listen, no one gets no one wants to do it, because we're already kind of overworked and overloaded with things that we've got to do. But there's just a dynamic environment and ecosystem here at the UFC that the figure out a way, get it done mentality is true, and it's very inspirational when you're around it and you're part of it.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear. I really liked what you were saying about the humour and fun, which I think is a really important part, especially when the stakes are high from a results perspective as well as a financial perspective. You're working in a really high pressure environment, but being able to bring fun and humour, I think, is so important. And I've been in environments, as I'm sure you have, where I've worked with leaders who are so outcome focused, and it's all about winning, it's all about the outcome, and we have to drive towards excellence and whatever, and yet there's zero fun in it, and zero ability to enjoy the journey. And I find that a really tough environment. And the fact that you've been able to bring that element when you guys are clearly under pressure, clearly overworked a lot of the time, there's a high stakes, but yet being able to bring that, I think, is refreshing to hear. And yeah, good that you can have that balance.
Yeah, and like I say, I just enjoy what I do. I try to keep it in perspective. We're doing high level stuff, and it's amazing, and we're influencing millions of people around the world from a viewership perspective. But it should be fun. It should be. There's lots of people that are in way worse off positions than we are. And yeah, we're going to be going to some dark places. We're going to challenge each other. We're going to have to push. We're going to have to pull up our sleeves and work harder than you've worked before. But if we do it in a way that's like connected, and we know that we're going through it together as a band of brothers and sisters, and we can have a little bit of a enjoyment and a smile on our face, I think it makes the energy in the system way better. And I think the functionality obviously then increases and goes up. And humor is just something which I enjoy, like comedy. And as I say, I come back to being an actor where I'm playing roles and playing characters, and a lot of it is self-deprecating humor. And that's another thing which the staff might see some kind of humility to. I don't know, but that's kind of how I go about it.
That's great. And what about the future? Is there anything that you can see in kind of sports leadership? Any growing trends? Any directions, or anything you want to kind of speak into around where sports leadership may be heading?
Well, I think and again, I'm batting the same dead horse, right? But I think at the core of it, it's people, right? And I think some of the fundamental areas that we're challenged with in sports leadership, injury and return to performance management, training load management, competition schedules, all these types of things that I don't see them changing too much, because at the end of the day, it's still about how people are going to process that and deal with it and understand their role in the bigger picture, whether that's the head coach putting together the schedule and team tactics, or whether that's kind of the sports scientist that's measuring the workload, or whether that's the medical team that are under the pump to make sure availability is maximized. I don't see some of these like interfaces that are driven by human experience changing too much. What I do think, obviously, is that artificial intelligence and speed of learning and the ability to handle and tolerate larger data and insights is going to be expedited that much more. So hopefully, as leaders, we don't spend as much time getting bogged down with things that are less accurate, the things that are not as a higher priority. So I'm hoping that kind of in the next 5 to 10 years, leadership really becomes targeted to those things that matter and count the most, with the backdrop, like I say, of the need still for human interaction. Like, we can't go entirely down the computer says yes or no type mentality, but I think that's going to be a great tool that will expedite, or at least focus and prioritize our areas that we're trying to manage and coordinate a little bit more directly. And then it gives us and allows us more time and more freedom to have that humanistic interaction, to have that personal relationship with team members, so that we can get the emotional and the social side of it still running well. So they've skirted around the question a little bit, but I do think some things are not necessarily going to change just by the nature of what sports performance is. But there's clearly going to be some tools that will hopefully focus us a little bit more on the things that matter.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I think there's been some really, really absolutely key insights that you've brought across your background, your journey, and then in your current role that have been absolutely fantastic to hear. And have you got any kind of final takeaways or anything you want to say to some of our listeners who may be aspiring leaders or who may be stepping into a leadership role for the first time? Anything you kind of just want to leave us with?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I can only draw on my own kind of mantra and what I try to do, and that's be authentic, but be reflective and aware. I think I try to be a reflective leader. I try to look at every day or every experience within a day and say, did I handle that right? Could I have handled it differently? What would have been the outcome? So I think, if you like journaling, or if you like kind of taking notes and doing some kind of historical, auditing, but I think reflective leadership is essential. That's going to make you a great leader. The second part of that is kind of get your head out your ass and get your ego out of the way. Like, it's not about you. You've got to do what's best in a selfless fashion for the team and the organization. The ego is the enemy type thing is real, and I think there are opportunities in leadership where you start to believe your own hype, and I think we just need a sense check. And again, to do that, reference point one I just made, be a reflective leader. And then I always try to lead with energy. I always try to lead with passion, energy, and enjoyment, enthusiasm, because I think when you start to look at, I've been getting into kind of the self-care side of things and how you sustain kind of personal wellness, and whether that's meditation or breath work or, getting out in nature, etc. Now you're going to call me a tree hugger, right? But the world kind of moves and ebbs and flows based on energy. And I think when you look at the entropy pathways within a dynamic systems model, a complex systems model that is sports performance, you've got to be ready to bring the energy. And I don't mean whooping and hollering all the time,
Mm,
but
mm,
I think you've got to have positivity, you've got positive energy. Even when times are very challenging, you've got to try and say, we're going to work through this, we're going to be better because of it. And that's something which I always try to, again, bring to the table. So
mm. So
that's,
just
that's
to push into that a little bit, I know we're just wrapping
no,
up, but like, what do you do then to refill your tank? Like, to look after your own well-being. What are you into? What are your hobbies, or what do you do to kind of make sure that you're energized, and that you can bring the energy?
yeah, and again, it's a critical part because my job, and I'm sure jobs that you've had, they consume you, right? I could spend
Mm,
all day, every day, responding to emails, writing strategy documents, planning what the next move is going to be. But again, for the greater good of my team, I have to be the best version of myself. Listen, my happy place is in the ocean when I'm surfing, or at least walking down a beach. So I know that at times I have to just get away and I have to go to the beach and just
mm,
be, get the salt water and the sand between my toes, and that kind of just totally resets me. There's just something about it. That's my happy place. For other people, I might be walking in the mountains or the hills. Other people might want to spend lots of time with a large family and really be sociable with your family. So whatever works with you, you've got to find that place, and you've got to make sure that you go to there on a semi-regular basis to get that reset. But I think there's micro resets that you can do as well on a
mm.
day-to-day, week-to-week basis. And as I say, I do meditation. I've got cold plunge that I do pretty regularly. I love going out and having fun with friends and eating a meal and socializing. And again, that's as a human race, we are sociable animals. And I think the more you pull away from social interaction because things are challenging or you're down at work, you're actually exacerbating the problem. The energy is now becoming more and more negative through your isolation. So you've got to get
Yeah.
back to integration, let other people lift you up and let other people bring up your spirits and your energy. And that might be nothing to do with work. It might be a group of, the soccer team or the pickleball that you're playing outside of work or whatever it may be. But again, it comes back to a sense check on your own energy levels, and your own self-care to keep it in a
Yeah.
positive kind of flow.
That's good. I really appreciate you being open and sharing what you do, because people often want to know, what does so and so do to refuel their tank or replenish their energy, and it's just nice to kind of hear different things and yeah, for you to be able to share what you're into. And I really liked one thing you said a little bit earlier as well, as about the ego and being able to kind of sense check and not kind of believing your own hype. And I think some people who would be in your position would just get carried away with the hype. And I when I worked in Formula One, I saw so many people come into the sport and just kind of lose themselves because they just loved the glitz and glamour and forgot who they were and why they were there. And I think the fact that you've been able to play such a key role in such a huge and growing influential organization and not let your ego get the better of you is really encouraging to see. And I feel you're the same person I knew 20 odd years ago, and that's nice. Obviously you grow and change and get
Yeah.
better and so on, but you know what I'm saying. So yeah, just want to thank you for everything you've brought. There's some absolute gems in there, and I know people are really going to enjoy listening to this. So thanks so much for your time, Dunk. Really appreciate it, and just want to wish you all the best.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, no, like it was good for me. Again, reflection, right? So, the invite to come and talk about leadership was an opportunity for me to reflect. So this has been a beneficial exercise for me as well. But yeah, just fun
Brilliant.
talking. Like I do what I do. I think I do it pretty well. Coming back to the point we're just making, I've got confidence in the fact that I'm in the position. I've been employed into this position because of my experience and my expertise. I'm not here by default. You know, I mean,
Mm.
I've landed in this position because of how I've conducted myself throughout my career. But yeah, at the same time, I just want to be the same dude. You know, I'm not getting ahead of myself, and I know that I've got to leverage and lean on my team and the organisation to get us all to the right place. And you know, like I say, it's team first, and they need strong leadership, and hopefully I bring them that. But yeah, today's been great, just chatting through it, and thanks for the platform to talk.
No, brilliant. Thank you. And keep in touch. We'll speak again soon.
Yeah, thanks,
All right.
mate.
Cheers. Bye bye.